Okay, picture this. You're at the grocery store. Cart's full of good intention. But then the colorful packages of processed snacks start calling your name.
Happens to the best of us.
Ever wonder why we're sometimes drawn to It's
a great question.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of information and try to extract the nuggets you really need to know.
And today we're diving into quite a fascinating collection. It's recent news and research aggregated just yesterday, May 20th, 2025, by Consumers.app. They call it Consumers 360.
Right. And our goal is to navigate these headlines, dig into the insights, and give you a clear, engaging understanding of what's happening. You know, consumer trends, what we eat, how we manage our health, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Shall we jump in?
Let's do it. Let's kick things off with feeding the next generation. CNBC on MSN.com had a piece. Harvard-trained pediatrician, the number one overlooked superfood more parents need to feed their kids.
The superfood label.
Yeah, that word always makes me a little skeptical.
Well, and it's interesting because according to Consumers Research, that term superfood, it's often more of a marketing thing than, say, a hard scientific classification.
Right.
They point out that while some foods are definitely nutrient-dense, the idea of one magic food, well, science doesn't really support that strongly.
So it's not like Popeye with spinach.
Not quite. I mean, the EU even has rules now. They restrict using superfood unless specific health claims are really backed by solid research.
Okay.
So the real superpower might just be, consistently varied diet.
That makes a lot more sense. So if we kind of ditch the single superfood idea, what should parents really be thinking about for kids' nutrition?
Well, Consumers Research highlights that putting together truly balanced diets for kids, it can be complex, especially if you're focusing on, say, plant-based options. This brings up the practical side, making sure kids get all those essential nutrients. Consumers Research really emphasizes looking at the actual nutrient content of food.
Like what specifically?
Well, for instance, they mentioned immature lima beans as a source of amino acids and choline, things kids need to grow.
Okay, lima beans. Didn't see that one coming.
And mushrooms for vitamin D, which, can be trickier in some plant-based diets. Things like B12 also need attention there.
Right. It's about the whole nutrient picture, not just one star food. Now, I always figured those school programs, teaching kids about healthy eating made a big long-term difference.
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But Consumers Research suggests maybe not as much as we hope.
Oh.
What's fascinating is some research modeling how kids develop eating habits. It suggests that the traditional classroom lecture style, it might not always lead to lasting changes.
So what works better?
It seems focusing on creating positive associations with healthy foods might be more effective. Repeated exposure, making it enjoyable.
So less lecturing, more tasty experiences.
Exactly. Make healthy food appealing, not just something they should eat.
That's a really interesting angle. Now, what about official recommendations, like from the CDC or the WHO?
So connecting this to the established guidelines, both the CDC and WHO recommend a diet for kids with lots of variety. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, low-fat dairy.
Classics.
Pretty much. And crucially, they emphasize limiting foods and drinks high in added sugars, saturated fats, and sodium. It's that solid foundation for healthy development.
Got it. So are there common nutritional gaps we see in kids' diets, particularly here in the U.S.?
Yeah, Consumers Research looked at data from 2024. Some common shortfalls include vitamin D, calcium, iron, and fiber.
Okay, the big ones.
Right. So to address these, they suggest incorporating more dairy, lean meats, legumes, beans, lentils, plus fruits, veggies, whole grains.
Makes sense.
And diversifying. Nutrient-dense options like eggs, beans, again, certain fish.
Yeah.
That can really help fill those gaps.
It's a good checklist. And nowadays, there's tech for everything, right? Even tracking nutrition. Consumers Research mentioned apps.
Yeah, it's quite innovative. There are smartphone apps using deep learning, image recognition, trying to estimate the nutritional content of meals.
How accurate are they?
Well, the accuracy is still improving. It's not perfect yet. But they offer a potentially convenient way for parents to get a better sense of their kids' intake. Kind of like a virtual nutritionist in your pocket, almost.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift gears. A topic that always gets people talking, red meat. The New York Times had an article. Is red meat bad for your heart? It may depend on who funded the study.
Oh, yeah. That headline definitely catches the eye.
It raises some red flags, you could say.
It does. And Consumers Research looked into this. They highlighted a pattern. Studies on red meat funded by the meat industry. They tend to report more favorable outcomes for heart health compared to independently funded research.
So potential bias.
It definitely raises legitimate questions about bias, how studies are conducted, how results are interpreted. Funding can, potentially influence that.
It really makes you wonder about the reliability of some nutrition advice, doesn't it? So what does the broader, maybe more independent research say?
Well, there was a big review, a meta-analysis in 2021. It looked at the link between red and processed meat and cardiovascular disease risk. Interestingly, they found a lot of variation across different studies. What they didn't find was consistent, strong evidence directly linking red and processed meat to a higher risk of heart problems.
So it's complicated.
It really points to the challenges in nutritional epidemiology. Studying diet and health over long periods is just hard.
So maybe hold off on throwing out the steak entirely. But consumers research also mentioned cutting out red meat might have some downsides too.
That's the other side of the coin, yeah. It's about the full nutritional picture. For example, research in the Philippines linked low intake of foods rich in riboflavin, things like meat, eggs, dairy to certain skin conditions, nutritional deficiencies.
Riboflavin, okay.
So while reducing red meat might be good for some, completely cutting out nutrient-dense foods without careful planning, well, that could lead to other issues.
It sounds like the old advice holds true: moderation and balance. So what are the general recommendations from, say, global dietary guidelines?
If you look at the big picture, at the dietary guidelines for Americans or the principles of the Mediterranean diet, they generally recommend limiting red meat.
And favoring
Plant-based proteins, fish, poultry. Those patterns are often linked to better overall health, including heart health.
Okay, and what about processed meats? Bacon, sausages, those usually get a worse rap.
That's generally the consensus, yes. Processed meats have been more consistently linked to increased risks. Various health problems, certain cancers, heart disease, even some neurodegenerative conditions.
So organizations like the WHO.
Right, the WHO, the American Heart Association, they often advise limiting or even avoiding processed meats, opting for less processed protein sources instead.
So if someone is looking to cut back on red meat, how do they make sure they're still getting what they need nutritionally?
Consumers research suggests a few strategies, things like food fortification, enriching common foods like rice with essential vitamins.
Okay.
Also, improving access to a wider variety of nutrient-rich foods, and importantly, nutrition education to help people build more diverse, balanced diets.
Makes sense. Helping people fill those potential gaps if they cut back on meat, like iron or B vitamins.
Exactly. Especially for people who might be at higher risk of deficiency.
It always comes back to being informed, making thoughtful choices.
Yep.
Okay, pivot time to something maybe a bit unusual for some listeners. Insects. Rolling Out asked, why insect protein is the future of sustainable food?
Yeah, that one definitely grabs your attention.
It does. What's the deal with insect protein?
Well, what's fascinating is their nutritional profile. It's actually pretty impressive. High-quality protein, essential amino acids, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals.
Really? Like what?
For instance, crickets and mealworms. They're rich in B vitamins, iron, zinc. And surprisingly, they even contain fiber chitin, which you don't usually get from other animal proteins.
Fiber from bugs. Okay, so nutritionally, they're potentially quite good. What about the sustainability angle? Is it really better for the environment than, say, raising cows?
There was a 2024 study looking at food products globally. It found that generally, producing insect protein generates significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, lower carbon footprint.
And requires less water compared to traditional animal proteins. Interestingly, the study also noted that more affordable food options, which can include insect proteins, tend to have a lower environmental footprint per calorie.
Wow, how much lower?
They actually quantified it. For every 10% price reduction, they saw a correlated decrease of about 20 grams of CO2 equivalent and 5 liters of water footprint per 100 kilocalories.
That's pretty significant, a compelling argument.
Yeah.
But are there, rules around this? Regulations? Eating insects is still pretty new for many cultures.
Yeah, as interest grows commercially, regulatory frameworks are definitely starting to emerge. The European Union, for example, has already authorized certain insect species for food, and they've put safety assessment and labeling requirements in place. Similar efforts are happening elsewhere to ensure food safety and give consumers clear info.
And what about cost? Is insect protein likely to be, easy on the wallet?
The 2024 global study suggested that, insect-based proteins are often more affordable than traditional animal proteins, especially when you factor in those lower environmental costs.
So Good nutrition, lower environmental impact, potentially lower cost.
It's a combination that could make them a really important part of more sustainable, accessible food systems globally.
Of course, with any new food, there are always potential concerns. Any risks with eating insects?
Well, yes. Allergic reactions are one potential risk, particularly for people with shellfish allergies, because insects contain similar proteins, like tropomyosin.
Ah, good point. Like shrimp or crab allergies.
Exactly. And it's also crucial to have strict regulations for farming and processing, to prevent contamination. Clear labeling is essential too, so people can make informed choices and manage any potential risks.
So, lots of promise, but it needs careful handling and good consumer info. Got it. Let's switch gears again. Plant-based meats. There's always a debate there. The Economist had a headline. Researchers call for nuanced approach to plant-based meat in ultra-processed food debate.
Yeah, this taps into a really complex issue right now.
So plant-based meats, what are we talking about exactly?
Essentially, products designed to mimic traditional meat using ingredients like soy, wheat gluten, pea protein, sometimes mycoprotein. People choose them for lots of reasons: diet, health, environment.
Right. And the debate is whether they count as ultra-processed foods or UPFs.
Exactly. That's the core argument.
Right.
Critics point to all the processing, the additives, flavorings, texturizers. They say these are hallmarks of UPFs, which some studies link to negative health outcomes.
Okay, that's one side.
But the other side, advocating for a more nuanced view, argues that, look, not all processing is automatically bad. They say plant-based meats can still offer benefits, like lower saturated fat compared to some animal meats.
So it's not black and white.
Pretty much. Groups like PAN International and GFI Europe are pushing for a balanced assessment, considering the processing, yes, but also the potential nutritional and environmental pluses.
It is tricky, and the tech in this space is moving fast, isn't it? What are some recent innovations?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're seeing things like precision fermentation. That's where microorganisms are engineered to produce specific proteins like whey or casein, but without the cow.
Wow.
Then there's tissue engineering, or cultured meat, growing meat directly from animal cells. And machine learning is being used everywhere, optimizing flavor, texture, even the cell culture conditions.
Companies like Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, they're pushing this.
They're definitely at the forefront, yeah, trying to make these alternatives taste, feel, and even cook more like conventional meat.
So what's the latest science say on the health impacts, plant-based versus traditional meat?
Well, current research suggests plant-based options can offer benefits: lower saturated fat, sometimes more fiber, but some products can be high in sodium or have a long list of additives.
So read the label.
Absolutely. The health impact really depends on the specific product and your overall diet. There's no definitive evidence of long-term risks right now, but moderation, variety, always good advice.
And the environmental side. We touched on this with insects. How do plant-based meats compare to livestock?
Research consistently points to a lower environmental impact for plant-based meats, generally less land, less water, less energy use, and fewer greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
A 2024 study backed this up again, highlighting their potential for more sustainable food systems.
It seems like technology is a huge driver here for both insect and plant-based proteins. Consumers research mentioned AI optimizing things.
Yes, exactly. Machine learning and AI are being used more and more, predicting the best conditions for growing cultured meat cells, designing better growth media, improving quality control with image analysis, making plant-based production more efficient.
So AI is helping make these alternatives better and maybe cheaper.
That's the potential, yeah. Accelerating research, reducing costs, improving quality and scalability. It's a key part of making these alternatives more viable.
Fascinating how interconnected all this food tech is. And consumers research also noted shifts in social norms, how we talk about food.
Right. Studies using computational models and behavioral research suggest that how we communicate really matters. Tailored strategies, personalized approaches, they seem quite effective in shifting social norms around meat consumption, encouraging more plant-based eating without causing too much pushback.
Interesting. Okay, let's tackle another big topic. Ultra-processed foods, or UPFs. The Associated Press on MSN.com reported, markers in blood and urine may reveal how much ultra-processed food we are eating.
Yeah, UPFs are definitely under the microscope right now.
So remind us, what exactly are they? How are they different from just processed food?
Think industrial formulations, made from refined ingredients, lots of additives, designed for long shelf life, intense taste, convenience, and, well, profit.
So not just canned beans or whole wheat bread.
No, those are usually considered minimally processed or processed. UPFs are things like sugary drinks, packaged snacks, reconstituted meats, pre-made frozen meals. The Novier classification system helps categorize foods based on this processing level.
And the health concerns seem to be mounting. What's the research showing about all those synthetic ingredients?
There's a growing body of evidence linking high intake of UPFs to increased risk of non-communicable diseases, obesity, heart disease, metabolic disorders. A big 2024 meta-analysis in the BMJ supported this link. And while regulatory bodies assess additives for safety, like GRAS status in the US or E numbers in the EU, there's definitely increasing caution about the long-term effects of consuming a lot of these.
So how can scientists actually measure how much UPF someone is eating? It must be hard to track accurately just by asking people.
Exactly. Self-reporting diet is notoriously tricky. That's where biomarker research is really exciting.
Biomarker.
Yeah, specific molecules in our blood or urine that act as objective indicators of what we've eaten. Techniques like metabolomics, using fancy equipment like LC-MS, can detect these unique metabolic fingerprints.
So it's like a chemical signature for UPFs.
Potentially, yes. It gives a much more accurate picture of dietary exposure than just relying on food diaries.
And what have these biomarkers shown about the link between UPFs and, say, inflammation?
A study from 2025 found a clear link. Higher UPF consumption was associated with elevated inflammatory markers in the blood, things like interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, and also higher white blood cell counts.
And what mediates that link?
The research suggests it might be partly mediated by increased body fat, which often goes along with high UPF diets. So these foods might be contributing to a kind of low-grade chronic inflammation that's linked to many diseases.
Wow. And they can even find biomarkers for specific ingredients. Consumers research mentioned onions.
Ah, yes. It sounds random, but it's a proof of concept. A 2023 study successfully identified specific urinary biomarkers for onion intake using LC-MS. They found unique metabolites that showed up in urine shortly after people ate onions. It demonstrates the potential of this approach to track intake of specific foods and ingredients much more objectively. Eventually, this could be used to better track UPF components too.
Very cool. What about additives like preservatives, things like sodium nitrite? Are there healthier alternatives being explored?
Yes, there's definitely concern about some synthetic preservatives. Research is looking into natural alternatives, like nitrate-rich plant extracts from beetroot or arugula, for example.
Plant extracts as preservatives.
Yeah, they can have preservative effects. And a 2025 study showed they can undergo beneficial chemical changes in the body, potentially enhancing antioxidant properties. So they're promising natural substitutes.
It sounds like regulations are trying to catch up, too, with labeling and safety.
Absolutely. Both the US and EU have rules for labeling ingredients and evaluating additive safety, but there's an ongoing push for even stricter evaluations and clearer labeling, really empowering consumers to understand what's in their food.
Okay, let's make one more big shift. Healthcare costs, something that affects pretty much everyone. The Straits Times reported on some practical ways to rein in rising healthcare costs. Premium.
Yes, the multi-trillion-dollar question, especially here in the U.S.
It often feels like costs just keep going up and up. Why is healthcare so expensive in the U.S. compared to other countries?
That's complicated. A mix of factors. Consumers research points to higher prices for services and drugs, more frequent use of certain services, really high administrative costs.
Bureaucracy?
Partly, yeah. Also, higher per capita income plays a role, and less government intervention in setting prices compared to many other nations. Data from 2015 already showed a huge gap in spending as a percentage of GDP.
A complex problem, no easy fix. But the headline promised practical solutions. What are some strategies that could actually help?
Well, things like increasing price transparency, so you actually know what something costs before you get the bill.
That would be nice.
Shifting towards value-based care, paying for good outcomes, not just per service. Emphasizing preventive care to stop problems before they get expensive. Negotiating drug prices.
Like other countries do.
Exactly. Discouraging unnecessarily expensive treatments when cheaper, effective options exist. Promoting generic medications. And, really importantly, patient education. Empowering people.
That patient empowerment piece seems key. How much difference can it make if patients choose less expensive but equally good options?
Potentially a huge difference on overall spending without sacrificing quality. But it needs clear, accessible information for patients, guidance from doctors about options and costs, and maybe even insurance incentives that reward cost-conscious choices.
And what about technology? Could tech help lower costs? Consumers research mentioned augmented reality.
Yeah, AR has potential. Things like telemedicine consultations, maybe remote surgical assistance, improving diagnostics, even making medical training more efficient and affordable.
But there are hurdles.
Definitely. Data security, patient privacy, those are big challenges that need solid solutions before widespread adoption.
Makes sense. Are there more sort of systematic data approaches being used?
Yes. Research is ongoing into using advanced statistical algorithms, analyzing huge healthcare data sets to pinpoint the main drivers of high costs. If you know what's really driving the spending, you can create more targeted interventions.
And what about big public health events like pandemics? How do they affect costs?
Modeling based on COVID-19 showed that non-pharmaceutical interventions, think social distancing, testing, tracing, actually had a significant impact on controlling overall healthcare costs. Perhaps even more than vaccination alone in terms of immediate system burden.
Really?
By reducing the strain on hospitals, lowering mortality, and thus reducing acute care expenditures, potentially without causing greater socioeconomic disruption than other approaches, it's about managing the surge.
Interesting. And finally, something maybe surprising. Consumers research mentioned you can actually negotiate medical bills in the U.S.
That's correct. It's often possible. Patients can talk to hospital billing departments. Sometimes you can get charges reduced, set up payment plans, or access financial assistance, especially if you're uninsured or facing large out-of-pocket costs.
Good to know. Many people probably don't realize that.
Yeah, many hospitals have processes for this. It's worth asking.
Okay, last deep dive for today. This one's really thought-provoking. Scientific American headline: DNA studies uncover unexpected evolutionary changes in modern humans.
Right. It kind of makes you rethink things. We tend to imagine evolution happened way back when.
Exactly. But this suggests it's still happening, actively.
That's what's really fascinating. Recent genomic research shows human evolution hasn't stopped. It's continued significantly, even in the last 10,000 years.
Wow. In what ways?
Particularly in areas like our immune systems, how we process different diets, think agriculture, and how we respond to various environmental pressures, like urbanization. Our lifestyles keep changing, and our genes are slowly responding.
So we're definitely not a finished product. Still evolving. Consumers research also mention inclusive fitness. How does that relate to our social behavior?
Inclusive fitness is an evolutionary concept. It expands on Darwin's idea of fitness just passing on your own genes. It includes the success of your relatives, too, because they share some of your genes.
So helping your family helps your genes survive.
That's the basic idea, yes.
Yeah.
It helps explain some cooperative behaviors. But anthropological research shows it's not just genes. Shared environment, culture, those often play huge roles, sometimes even bigger than genetic relatedness, in shaping human cooperation.
Right. It's nature and nurture, as always. Now, the word fitness, we use it for health, but also in evolution. Can you clarify the difference?
Good question. Physical fitness, how we use it today, is about health. Your body's ability to function well in daily life, work, leisure, emergencies, is about exercise, nutrition, rest.
Okay. And Darwinian fitness?
Darwinian fitness is purely about reproductive success. How effectively an organism passes its genes to the next generation. That's what natural selection primarily acts on, traits that boost reproductive success, not necessarily just individual health span or physical prowess in isolation.
Got it. Reproductive success versus physical health. What about decision-making? Especially with risk. Does evolution play a role there?
Emerging research suggests it does. Our choices under risk might be influenced by evolutionary pressures that favored decisions maximizing long-term survival and reproduction in our ancestral past.
So what seems irrational now might have made sense back then.
Possibly. The idea of evolutionary rationality suggests our risk preferences aren't fixed. They adapt to context and information, often aligning with historically advantageous outcomes. It might even explain some odd patterns seen in decision experiments, like the LA paradox.
Fascinating. Thinking about our evolutionary history shaping current choices. Consumers research also mentioned using genetic programming to study fitness. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a computational approach. Researchers use genetic algorithms, computer programs that mimic evolution to solve problems or optimize designs. They can create benchmarks based on these algorithms to study how different strategies lead to better fitness or adaptation in artificial systems.
So simulating evolution on a computer.
In a way, yes. And it can give insights into complex biological processes, including aspects of human fitness and adaptation.
And how does this connect to artificial intelligence? Seems like a leap.
It's actually becoming quite relevant. Researchers are finding that if they design the reward functions for AI agents based on evolutionary principles, essentially, What the AI is trying to achieve, the resulting AI, tends to be more adaptable, more robust, especially in complex changing environments.
So making AI more evolutionarily fit.
Kind of. Aligning the AI's goals with something like evolutionary fitness seems to help create more resilient and capable artificial agents. It borrows from nature's success.
Wow. Well, this has been an incredibly wide-ranging discussion. So much ground covered, from superfoods to AI evolution, all thanks to that consumers.app aggregation.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is, doesn't it? Food, health, technology, costs, even our own biology.
Absolutely. And what's striking is how fast our understanding is changing in all these areas. New research, new tech, it's constant.
Definitely. Whether it's figuring out the best way to nourish our kids, navigating the complex world of food choices, or trying to manage health and costs, staying informed is just crucial for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we'll leave you with something to chew on. Considering how rapidly both food science and our understanding of the human body are advancing, what might our individual understanding and pursuit of optimal well-being actually look like, say, a decade from now?
A big question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. And if you have worked this exploration and want to stay curious, stay informed, be sure to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more.